Howdy, folks. My name is Jeff, and welcome back to the Power of Three programming channel. In our last episode, you might remember we did some initial setup for our DJ management system. So we set up our Visual Studio projects, we scaffolded a few tables, and we connected our projects to a repo up in GitHub. All of those sort of standard first steps when we're setting up our projects. So today we're going to continue on with this setup, but we're going to be focusing specifically on a public part, as I envision the website, a public part of our DJing request system. So what I'm thinking of is, imagine you're at a party and you want to request a song from a DJ, and let's just say my site provides like a printable QR code, and that QR code can be scanned by a phone, and that takes you to a public website connected to that event that you're at, and you're able then to send a request to that DJ. So before we can start on the UI, we have to have all of that backend stuff in place. So today we'll be creating some managers, probably a couple controllers. I would like to start setting up a Postman project, so not only can we do regular tests of our API, but we can also use it to seed some data in the database and everything, test everything out, obviously. And I think we're going to do some tweaking to our entity framework setup. So we'll probably also put some seed data in there and maybe centralize our configuration. All right, enough chatting. Let's get to it. All right, first up, I'm going to be adding a new project to the solution. It's a project for our API. I apologize that the screens for doing the configurations for the API, they didn't show up here on the recording, but right here, API is added in. Next up, we'll be working in our manager project. Since we'll be using dependency injection, we're going to set up our interfaces folders and then a folder for our managers where we'll implement our interfaces. Okay, with the help of some AI, and after we've did a little double checking of our AI, we've got our managers and our interfaces and managers implemented. Now we are going to ask the AI to implement CRUD methods in some controllers, two controllers. Okay, the AI is done with creating our controllers, and I've gone through and double checked the code. Now we're moving on to getting our API to fire up, and I'm just troubleshooting why the Swagger screen isn't starting or is giving me errors when I try to start up the API. Okay, success. We got Swagger up and running on the left-hand side of the screen there. Turns out it was a little bit of user error. Now we're going to be moving on to doing some entity framework configuration using the entity framework's iEntity type configuration interface to help centralize all of our table and data seeding configurations. So you might notice that I have a GitHub repo open on the left-hand side of my screen, and that's because I'm not an expert with Entity Framework. I'm very familiar with using it and everything, but I'm actually taking a class on it right now. So this is the repo that is associated with the class, and I'm just using some of the knowledge that has been given to me from the class and implementing it into my code right on the screen right here. So we got our migrations and our database updated after wrestling with Entity Framework for a little bit, as you can see with the red lines right there. And we got some seed data, some event user data into the database. So now it's time to move on to the next part of our project. All right, folks, this is where I cut in and say, I don't know what happened to the recording of the next section that I was alluding to in my commentary there. I recorded it, but it's gone. So, we are just going to proceed, and I'm just going to give you an overview of what we did for the entire project here so you can see what was done. So we're going to start over here in Visual Studio, and let's kind of start down at the bottom of the stack. And actually, let's start over. We did some Entity Framework configuration. So we created these separate event configs to help organize our Entity Framework configuration on our database when we created our databases. So we've got 3 different files that are implementing that iEntity type configuration class and everything. And then we moved on. Like we showed earlier, we worked on our managers and our interfaces. So I've created 2 interfaces. We went and implemented 2 classes off of those interfaces and had AI help us create the CRUD. Now, I like to keep my managers as simple as possible. They are just there to move data, whether it's loading data or saving it back to the database. Not a lot of other logic in there. If we need more, we'll add it as we go along. Right now, it's that standard sort of simple logic. Next, we're going to move up to our API levels, and we had AI help us implement our controllers, just getting those generic CRUD method in our controllers up and running for us. And once again, they're basically just shuttling data at the moment, and they're also doing a little air trapping for us as well. That's where I like to do my air handling and air catching if I need to. Once we start to figure out what our API needs to do for us in the various calls, we will add in more complexity, but we're just starting simple. As a part of this process, we also had I had the AI scaffold out some data transfer objects. This way we're not passing back raw Entity Framework objects. And to assist with that, I had it create some mapping profiles. There's just a quick look at our mapping profiles. By default, I'm not sending back like the deleted by and deleted date and created and modified date. I'm not sending those back right now. My thought is let's just save the bandwidth. If we need that information, we can simply change our profiles later. So that is a lot of the backend work that we did in this project, which leads us over to then our work in Postman. So I like to use Postman to do, the testing of our APIs, just to make sure things are working. So the first thing I did in Postman was implement a environment, just a local environment. And I put in one environment variable, and that's the API URL. So my URL to the local hosted version of my API. Next was to get a couple collections up and going. So I do my collections typically by controller that is in the API. So we have 2 controllers, thus I have 2 collections in there. And I like to, as a rule of thumb, set up one collection level variable that's called controller name, and I put in the actual name of the controller that is being called back in our API. And that is because I also like to use scripts for testing results as they come back. So the first thing that I do is actually get the name of the controller, and then I run some Postman tests. So as you can see here, I'm checking to see if the code that was returned was between 2 and 204, and then I'm checking to see if the response time is less than 300 milliseconds. And these tests get run every time a request gets done in this collection. And then, of course, we went and recreated our different requests for our controllers, or at least the controllers, or at least the calls that I used in this part of the video to, one, help populate data, to help check data, and just other things that I needed to use at this time. I haven't implemented everything yet, but as we go along, we will little by little implement our calls out here in our collections. And I also like to put little scripts on each test that are necessary. So in this case, I have it testing to see whether the JSON is valid. Once again, we're getting that controller name. So let's just take a second and watch this run. Everything's firing up for the first time, so it's kind of slow. So which is why one of our tests failed. 2 out of the 3 were successful. So now what I like is that whenever something gets printed out about a test, it tells me the name of the controller and then the name of the test. So I don't have to guess where it is and which test it was. So it was the response call, or the response time. Took a little longer than it was supposed to, but that's because everything had to warm up. I hadn't warmed anything up yet. So anyways, that is our Postman tests, and that's the complete overview, sort of very quick overview of what we did in our project this week. So that's going to lead us to, hopefully, next episode 3, we will begin to work on the UI and map out and create and scaffold just a basic UI. That UI that will be used for people at a party, the anonymous UI, doesn't require any logging in or anything, and we'll start programming features into it and figuring out what features we want. All right, folks, thanks once again for joining me here on the Power of 3 Programming. We got a lot done, and I think in the next episode we will be able to start scaffolding out some version of a UI for that public part of the website where people will come into and actually enter in their requests and just start exploring that and seeing what features we may want to add now and add later as we do the project. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.